Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Thursday and welcome to our very first Thanksgiving video. We're going to be discussing a little bit of its history, its modern relevance for us today, as well as its relevance for us as pagans, and also the symbolism and the magical correspondences of our favorite Thanksgiving treats. So let us begin. So how Thanksgiving as we know it came to be. We have quite the historical journey to take. In past centuries, it was not uncommon for there to be declared days of Thanksgiving and feasting to mark very important events. And so it was a general process of evolution, but also an inherited tradition of sorts that eventually led into our Thanksgiving becoming an annual celebration. Now, this is a cultural celebration. It crosses ethnic and religious lines, and no matter what anyone's background is, we all have something to be thankful for. And it says something about the good that's in our culture, that there's a day where we prioritize gratitude. Because this holiday isn't about decorations or present giving or anything really material. I mean, apart from the meal, obviously that is a material thing, but that's more so about what the meal means. It's a celebration for the fruits of the harvest, reaping the fruits of your labor, as well as gathering together with family and friends. It's about reaffirming relationships, enjoying each other's company, and being thankful for the blessings that you have in life. Now, as pagans, and particularly Wiccans, we have all manner of religious harvest festivals. In fact, we just completed our third one. You know, we have Lunasa, we have Mabon, and then we have Samhain. But let's think about this for a minute. I mean, you might be thinking, well, why do I need to celebrate the harvest again? And my argument would be because this is part of our cultural heritage. And there's nothing about Thanksgiving that contradicts our beliefs. If anything, it's a recognition, at least on a cultural level, of the need to be grateful, as well as the desirability of being able to live in peace with someone who is different from yourself. Being able to live with people who have different religions, different ideology, given the fact that paganism in any form is very much a minority religion still, I think we would all do well to appreciate just how momentous that idea really is and how important it is for us to be able to practice and worship freely. It is also an incredible opportunity to whip up some kitchen magic. So even if you are completely in the broom's closet, you know, anything that you do to bring to the feast, or whether you're in charge of the whole thing, you'll be able to discreetly put a little bit of extra magic in it, and that gives even more meaning and benefit to the occasion than what it already does. Now, the American tradition of Thanksgiving has its roots in the story of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe. The Pilgrims had fled England to get away from religious persecution, and they also, along with that, well, this is a new land, maybe I'll be able to own some land, have a farm, or have a business, have a life, in short, be able to raise myself up out of poverty. Now, they struggled dearly for even this glimmer of hope. They had a very difficult ocean crossing, and even after they had made landfall and they had made their way to the area where they would establish the village of Plymouth, the challenges were not over, not by any stretch of the imagination. They had a really bad winter that year. Most of the settlers ended up staying on the ship, but they were crowded, it was unsanitary, people were dying of exposure, of scurvy, and a variety of contagious diseases. And when it was all said and done, only half of the passengers and crew survived to see the spring. Just imagine that. You leave in this boat, you're going off an adventure, you have a hope of a new life, you just want to be left alone to live in peace. And then by the time you are able to really start trying to establish your community, suddenly half of the people you started with were gone. That would leave a hell of a psychological impact. Now this brings us to March of 1621. These survivors, those few, they moved ashore, and to their very great surprise, they quickly received a visit from an Abenaki Native American who spoke English. And then after that first meeting, he would come again with an individual that we're a bit more acquainted with called Squanto. He was part of the Pawtuxet tribe. He'd had the misfortune in previous years of being kidnapped by an English captain and was actually sold into slavery. But very luckily, he had escaped to London. He got away from all that. He joined up an exploratory expedition, and so he was able to make his way back home. But despite that, I mean, it would be hard-pressed to have a worse introduction to a different culture than that, of of, oh, hello, well, we'll just sell you into slavery. But despite all that, he didn't seem to be holding a grudge. He did not seem to be prejudiced against the English or the Europeans. Instead, he became extremely neighborly to the Pilgrims. He saw to it that they were able to survive. He taught them about cultivating corn, how to extract sap from maple trees, how to fish, which plants were poisonous. None of these things were things that the Pilgrims were familiar with in that environment. So he was an extraordinary help and benefit to them. And he even ended up brokering a treaty between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag, and that treaty lasted for over 50 years. That's a hell of a legacy. Now, interestingly, one of the provisions of the treaty was that if a Wampanoag tribe member had wronged the Pilgrims, that culprit would be handed over to the Pilgrims and their system of justice. And if a Pilgrim wronged the Wampanoags, then that perpetrator would be handed over to the Wampanoags to be judged and measured by their own particular systems of justice. So there was some even-handedness to this treaty. They had managed to find an arrangement that worked well for both parties. There's a lot to learn from that, and considering the times and the general philosophies of the time, it really is an extraordinary accomplishment that that even happened at all. Something to think about. Now let's go to November 1621. Now, to celebrate this first successful harvest, the governor of the Pilgrims, a man called William Bradford, he decided to have a feast, and he invited a lot of the Wampanoags, including the chief, who was called Massasoit. And this was a proper festival that lasted for 3 days. We don't know exactly what was on the menu. We do know it wasn't exactly how we celebrate today, for obvious reasons. But according to Edward Winslow, who was a chronicler for the Pilgrims, he did mention that there was a variety of fowl and deer. What else they might have had, we don't know. But historians believe that in all probability, whatever was served at that feast, it was probably prepared using traditional Native American spices and cooking methods. So far as we know, the Pilgrims lacked an oven, and their sugar supply was extremely limited, so they probably didn't have cakes, pies, or any other kind of dessert. But nevertheless, I'm sure if they had had that at their disposal, that they would have. I mean, it's a party. Who doesn't like a little bit of something for the sweet tooth? Now, other Thanksgiving celebrations happened sporadically through the future years. After the American Revolution, well, during it really, as the country was in the process of getting established, the Continental Congress declared a number of different days to be days of Thanksgiving, usually to mark some kind of victory by the Army. Then in 1789, George Washington issued the very first Thanksgiving proclamation, and this came from the national government. That had just gotten up and running. It was to celebrate the Revolution as well as the ratification of the Constitution. It was we've got our ducks in a row, we were successful, we have our freedom, now we can just move forward and live life. And then his successors, John Adams and then later James Madison, they both declared days of Thanksgiving during their tenures as president. Then in 1817, New York became the first of several states to make Thanksgiving an annual holiday, and each state had different days that they set aside for this, and this was also more of a northern tradition. The southern states didn't really have Thanksgiving. It just wasn't part of their deal, and it makes sense because they didn't have the history of this historic meeting between settlers and tribe and a successful treaty and all this and that, so it was something that came later. Then in 1827, Sarah Josepha Hale, who was a respected magazine editor and a prolific writer, began a campaign to make Thanksgiving a national holiday, and for 36 years she published editorials and wrote letters to governors, senators, presidents, any other assorted politician, and she made her case. And this is why she has the nickname of being the Mother of Thanksgiving. And I would like to just briefly point out that her accomplishment of being a magazine editor and a writer who was acknowledged and respected, that would have been remarkable even in 1927. But for that to happen in 1827, it says something about the character of this lady, her willingness to overcome obstacles, and that no matter what the prevailing winds of a society is, if you have a passion and you just make up your mind you are going to pursue that and screw what other people think, you can achieve something. If she can do it in 1827, then those of us today really have no legitimate excuse for not pursuing the ambitions we actually want to pursue. So, now, 1863. We have Abraham Lincoln. He made a proclamation and he asked Americans to celebrate a day of Thanksgiving to honor fallen soldiers who had died in the Civil War, as well as praying for a healing of the nation. And he scheduled this for the fourth Thursday of November, and that has stuck. At least it did until 1939. Then we had FDR, who was forever meddling with things that he shouldn't have been meddling with. He moved Thanksgiving up a week, thinking this would improve retail sales. Now, this idea was met with scorn, and it was mockingly called Franksgiving. And there was passionate opposition as well as to the presumption of him having done that to begin with. Because, from 1863 to 1939, that's a pretty big chunk of time in which everyone was perfectly content for Thanksgiving to be where it was. In the end, FDR caved, and in 1941, he begrudgingly signed a bill that made Thanksgiving the fourth Thursday in November. So the lesson is, politicians need to leave our traditions alone. Naughty, naughty. Now this brings us to the relevance of making peace with a different culture in our day and age. Now the history between settlers and native tribes is far from perfect, and that is a massive understatement. And I don't think any honest person would deny that. So the difficulties of the history, it really makes the peace treaty between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags all the more remarkable and worthy of celebration. They had no common ethnicity, no common culture, no common religion between their groups, yet they managed to strike a deal and coexist for over 50 years. How many marriages last for over 50 years because they can't figure out a way to get along? Now, it doesn't mean that everything was perfect during this time or that everyone involved was a perfect person or had an enlightened attitude towards the other group, but it was a significant step forward, and it was a leap of faith on both sides. Another thing about the time span of 50 years, because we tend to live into our 70s and even 80s and 90s, we forget that life expectancy, centuries past, was not what it is today. A lot of people in the 17th century kind of hovered around 40. There's a lot of reasons for this. Infant mortality rates were absolutely abysmal. Many people did not survive childhood due to illness or injury. Women routinely died in childbirth. Men, of course, had the additional danger of dying in war when they were called up for service, or in the course of hunting, or in the course of their profession. So when you think about it, 50 years in those days could well comprise a person's entire life. And even today, for a peace treaty to last 50 years, it's actually quite remarkable. I mean, just imagine if there was a period of peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians that lasted for over 50 years. Now, depending on the context, 50 years might as well be an eternity. But this is especially the case when we're talking about groups that are inclined to be at odds with one another. So the idea that just because the treaty didn't last forever, or because most introductions between the European settlers and the native tribes did not go well at all, that does not invalidate the value of what those groups managed to accomplish back in 1621. If anything, I think it underscores it, because it was not an easy thing to do. So if someone wants to eschew Thanksgiving because things didn't go well, you're not really looking at this in the right way. Thanksgiving is about hope. It's about potential, and it's about grateful for having peace for today, for having food in your belly today, and for knowing that you will be able to see another day. That's what it's about. It's not about, did everything turn into peace and harmony for forever? I mean, have you noticed human beings? That's not what we do. We should be grateful for whatever peace and harmony we manage to create. Another thing to keep in mind is that just as when Lincoln first declared Thanksgiving to be a national holiday, the country is once again split into two. We may not have armies marching towards each other on a literal battlefield, but even so, we are at odds. And the situation is serious, and it has gotten increasingly serious just within the past few months. And even people who don't keep track of the nasty, murky machinations of politics, they're aware there's a divide. It gets wider every day. It's affecting their friendships. It's affecting their families. Now, I don't know if the nation is going to get through this period of time as a single intact country, or if eventually there will be a national divorce of some kind. But what is clear that it's that left and right don't just refer to political persuasions. These represent, quite literally, different cultures. The left is rife with collectivism, authoritarianism, ideological conformity. The right is based upon individualism and freedom. It's nearly impossible to see a basis to how to knit these two sides back together. However, in the 1600s, it would have been difficult for a lot of people to imagine that the native tribes and the settlers would be able to find enough common ground to coexist, and to do so peacefully. But they did so for over 50 years. Now, I'm not saying that what happened for them is what's going to happen for us, but I am saying it's an example that serves as a foundation for hope for our current troubles, or at least the possibility of hope. And that's worth something. Throughout human history, our species has always formed tribes of one kind or another, and despite any differences that may exist between groups, there are some commonalities that we do all share between us because we're human beings living on Earth. We all need to be able to earn our own living. We all want to be able to live a good life. We want to have happy families. We care about our children's future. And I think for the most part, most of us don't mean any harm at all to our neighbors, whether we have much in common with them or not. You know, we don't go around like mustache-twirling villains thinking about, oh boy, there's George over there. How can I do him down today? I mean, we just don't think about that. We just want to go about our business and live life. And I think it is possible to have a community made up of people who have a wide variety of backgrounds, as long as the majority of those people in that community are agreeable to living in peace and letting people go about their business without a hassle. And for the moment, we seem to have lost that world. But I believe it is possible to recreate, and if we do, we'll all be better for it. So let's hope such efforts will be successful. That would be something that would be truly worth feeling thankful and grateful for. Now, some of the fun stuff. All things have magical correspondences, and it is no different when it comes to the yummy foods that we eat. So first, the turkey. It is associated with both the elements earth and air, because, you know, they do live on the ground, and they sometimes make pathetic attempts to fly through the air. So, limited air, limited. But they represent abundance, confidence, gratitude, thankfulness. It's not just because they're large birds and they're very good at feeding a crowd that makes it so appropriate for this holiday. It is everything about the turkeys, because turkeys are not bashful, or at least not the ones who I've observed. They are going about their turkey life, and you know, sometimes through consuming them, we take in a little bit of that for ourselves. Another traditional main dish at Thanksgiving is, of course, ham. Hams are associated with the moon and with the goddess, particularly the mother goddess. One of her metaphorical forms is that of a sow. You know, sow having the piglets and providing the food, and so it's all about abundance and fertility and motherhood, and that ties in very strongly with the idea of family. You know, what is at the center of the family? It is the mother figure. It is the matriarch. And then we have mashed potatoes and gravy. I don't have any correspondences for the gravy itself, but it would retain its properties from the ingredients it's composed from. But for the mashed potatoes, think the moon, the element of earth, as well as protection, compassion, potency, and wishes. I have not yet found any uses for potatoes in the sense of divinatory purposes, but I think that would be interesting to find out, since it has some relationship to wishes, and of course divination also relates to our wishes and the desire to know what's going to happen, what will be likely to happen. Sweet potatoes is also quite traditional. They are associated with the planet Venus, as well as the elements of water and earth. And magically, they are good for the purposes of attracting love, sex, as well as nurturing and comfort. Then we have green beans, the perennial traditional green bean casserole. Green beans, I didn't find very much information on them, but they are linked with prosperity. And then carrots. A lot of people have glazed carrots or different dishes that they make carrots with. Some of it's really very pretty. Pinterest is very inspirational right now. But carrots are ruled by the planet of Mars, and they're associated with the element of fire, probably owing to their coloring. But they are useful for banishings, clarity, fertility, and illusions. So if you have any concerns about behavior of relatives, perhaps doing a little bit of an enchantment on the carrots to banish any energies that would make conflict and arguments or awkward discussions more likely. That would be something that the kitchen witch could get done. And then of course we have stuffing and things like cornbread or rolls. These are all tied with the element of earth. They're all about abundance. Certainly by eating them you could enchant them to where it's spreading the blessing of abundance to the family members. Then we have cranberry sauce, ruled by the planet Mars, associated with the elements fire and water. And this is about abundance, energy, healing, and love. I, for one, love cranberry sauce. I make it from scratch. It is the most wonderfulest thing ever. And the fact that it can be magicked up to go along with the themes of the holidays just makes it that one thing better. Then, last but not at all least, we have pumpkin pie. Pumpkins are ruled by the moon and the planet Jupiter, and as well as the element of earth. They are good for healing, prosperity, abundance, and divination. Pumpkin pie is the best thing ever. So, just a few magical intentions to be keeping in mind as you start planning your menu, and any kitchen magic you might want to pile on top of that. Now, in the description box below, as well as the usual invitation to come and join Blackbird's Brew on Discord, I will also have 2 links to history.com that go a little bit more deeply into the history of Thanksgiving, as well as the peace treaty between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags. So if you're interested, you can definitely click on those. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, give my video a like, and leave me a comment if the spirit should so move you. But until next time, bye-bye.